when we were there, that light was rather pronounced. You would see it more often than not. It wasn't there every night. It's been studied by scientists from all over the world, from China, Japan, Germany. Numerous expeditions have come to Marfa to try to figure out what that light is.
Dale Short was born in Topeka, Kansas. His father got a job with the U.S. Border Patrol in the early 1940s, and together they moved to Yuma, Arizona. After around a year in Arizona, Dale's father then took a position in Mercedes, Texas. They were in the Rio Grande Valley, close to Harlingen and McAllen. Dale went through high school there and then graduated at the time of the Vietnam conflict. Rather than be drafted, Dale chose to join the Naval Reserves in Harlingen. He served there for 2 years while going through college. He further served 2 years in California at Camp Pendleton. Of those camps, he was specifically in Camp Las Pulgas. He was in the Naval Reserves and also attached to the U.S. Marine Corps. As a Corps man, Dale went through what was known as field medical training. His position was as a dental technician. At Camp Pulgas, Dale and Dr. Joseph Penitze primarily focused on oral surgery and did this day in and day out. Dale then continued his career as Border Patrol stationed in Marfa, Texas. After some time there, he switched over to U.S. Customs in El Paso, Texas for around 5 years. After that, he worked many years in Presidio, Texas, and became port director for over 10 years there. Dale then took a position in Columbus, New Mexico, living and working there for about 5 to 8 years.
When I was in Mercedes and in high school and whatnot, me and my friends, we did a lot of hunting. In daytime and nighttime, I did some trapping for the public water services there, where they had a lot of nutria and beaver and so forth. But in one of our hunting experiences, we were on a levee down around Harlingen, Texas, and we would hunt at night, and we had a powerful light that you would plug into the cigarette lighter. So it was quite bright for quite a distance, for maybe 200 yards. You could detail what kind of animal you were looking at, be it a rabbit or whatever. But we were on the levee, and we noticed that there was the Harlingen Airport had a glowing red light that has arisen from the airport area and was slowly rising, very slowly. So it caught our interest, and we jumped in the car and we drove a mile or so. We got, I would say, to a half mile to a quarter of a mile of the airport, and we continued to watch the light to slowly raised up. We noted there was no wind around us. One would maybe think it was a balloon. And it continued to rise. It sort of surprised us. It was something we couldn't explain. The thought occurred to me, well, we're around an airport, maybe it's an airplane doing what airplanes do. And in the far distance, I could hear an airplane much further away than what was in front of us. And so, no, it wasn't an airplane. It went up quite high, well above our heads. We had to move our head back quite a bit to see it. We put our light on it, the spotlight that we had, and never got a response from it. It ultimately rose to above our head and stayed there. This probably lasted 10 to 15 minutes while we watched this. We got tired of it after a bit and decided to continue with our hunting. But since then, I've never been able to explain it, because I can't see why around an airport they would let a weather balloon or something of this nature fly up. And most airplane type lights are a blinking light. They're not a continuous light. So there was one of the things that I never had an explanation for. And another incident that took place when I was living in Mercedes, as I said earlier, my father had been in the Border Patrol, and at the time he was a supervisor, at the time that I was in high school, going to college too. And he at one time was telling me about an experience that some of his officers had down on the river. Mercedes is about 10 miles north of the Rio Grande River in the valley down there. And the station was responsible for a certain 25, 30 miles of riverfront down there, plus everything that went back into the States. And he had two of his officers down there. The river would not always be very high. It would be quite shallow, and you could certainly swim across it with ease, let alone sometimes walk across. But they had certain crossings there. So he had two of his officers. They took their Jeep down, parked it. They would take a thermos of hot coffee and a blanket, and then get over the crossing and be able to look down at it. The blanket would be to set on with ants and all kinds of insects around. The coffee was to keep them awake and so forth and so on. So it gets dark, and they're there. It's quite dark, and they notice a light on the river water. As I understood it, it was like a disc, but very small, by very small. I'm going to say 3 or 4 feet. It might have been smaller, it might have been larger. But glowing from underneath that disc was a bright light. And as I recall what my dad told me, it wasn't over the middle of the river. It was following the edge of the river. And it was as if it was examining whatever might be in the water, on top of the water, under the water, God only knows. But the two Border Patrolmen, it scared them, and they did not want anything to do with it. They picked up all of their stuff and brought it back, jumped in the Jeep, and away they went. Well, they reported, wrote it up, and then they were told the FBI was going to come down there and interview them. So they did so. And I guess they each individually went in the room with the agent, and he took their statements and so forth. But when they got done, the FBI told the two agents, "You don't tell anybody about this. This is you just forget about it," and so forth. So that was my another experience that I had when I was in living in Mercedes. And then from there, I went to Marfa. As I said, I had joined the Border Patrol. So I was stationed there, and there we have, or they have, what they call the Marfa Lights. And in the many years since I have left that area, you don't have what we saw, or I saw. Me and my friends, the other Border Patrolmen, went out to an area overlooking where they see the Marfa Lights. And if I can describe that, they have a viewing center there now. But in front of that viewing center, in the far, far distance, you can see a range of mountains that are just up a little bit. The original Marfa Light was seen there by a conquistador that came up from up the rivers, the Rio Bravo, where it meets the Rio Grande. And in that area there, they were looking for gold or silver or whatever. And they noted this light in the distance that was there every night. It's south of Highway, I think it's 90, that was between Marfa and Alpine. In talking to the Indians there, they told the conquistadors that, I guess in their folklore, that the light was the chief, that his village had been slaughtered. He was the only one left, and he was looking for those that were slaughtered. Back in those days, I think it was the Apaches would come down, and there were numerous little settlements along the river, and they would raid those settlements, take so much of the food, but never all of it, because they wanted to come back the following year and do the same thing. So anyway, that was the story that they had at the time. When we were there, that light was rather pronounced. You would see it more often than not. It wasn't there every night. It's been studied by scientists from all over the world, from China, Japan, Germany. Numerous expeditions have come to Marfa to try to figure out what that light is. Some of the old tales is that where they had an Air Force base also built there for World War II in the middle of nowhere for a lot of practicing that nobody would know about. And they were concerned with the light or interested in the light. And they would get a plane and put bags of flour in it and in Jeeps, and they had the radios back at that time, walkie-talkies and whatnot. And they'd get a guy to come up and fly towards the light and whatnot, and they'd get those Jeeps around and try to orchestrate where he might be over the light, and then tell him to drop the flour, which he would do. And then in the morning, they'd jump in their Jeeps and go out there and try to find where the bags of flour had landed. And then from that, they would look around, seeing if they could find any quartz or things that might reflect light or swamp gas or whatever. By the same token, scientists in this day and age have done the same thing, and they cannot come with a conclusion of what it might be, and so forth. But with all that in mind, when I was in the Border Patrol there, it was somewhat more exciting because you could sit there and you would know, because you'd been on this area, which it would extend for maybe 10 miles or so. In front of you, it's dark, you got the moon up there. You can barely see the darkness of the land, which is scrub brush. Knowing that there's numerous dirt roads in there, but they're not straight. These are roads that go through ranch land, that go through gullies, and you can't, without heavy machinery and a lot of money, you can't make a straight road. They just took the best route that they could do to snake their way through that country. So you're sitting there and you're looking at this area, and you can see these orbs of light moving around, that you know that it's slow. When you know that it's from here to there, it's 9 miles. But if you were there, he's moving pretty darn fast. And he's not going through the gullies up and down or anything like that. It's moving in a straight line. They would turn off and reappear over here after a bit. Other lights would join them. It was quite a mystery to observe that. But today, they have the Marfa lights, and unfortunately, there's a bunch of traffic that travels from Marfa to Presidio, Presidio to Marfa, be it headlights coming at you or car lights leaving you, but there's numerous curves in the road, a lot of people hitting their brakes and whatnot, and people mistake those lights for what they call the Marfa lights, and they're not. The Marfa light is one light off to the left of all of that, but what we were seeing was also to the left, but it was over the flatlands and stuff like that. Other people have stories about what they experienced there, and a sister-in-law, she was scared to death one time, and the light was chasing them. And she was very young at the time. I mean, she's not lying or anything of that nature. It's just scared the heck out of her and her friends and things of this nature. But I can't really elaborate on that story because I don't remember it that well. But that was one of the things that I found to be very interesting with what we observed. When I was working there in Marfa, to the west of there, from Marfa to a little pueblito called Lobo, it was in our district, and down south from Lobo to the Rio Grande, there was a dirt road that was extremely rough, rocks and whatnot. But we used to have to go up and sit on a little rise overlooking the road where you could see for maybe 8 or 10 miles. If a car came up and had the lights on, you would know it was coming. It's going to go between hills and all that good stuff. As you're looking to the south, what some people might call a big hill, a small mountain, is taller than you, and it's across from you, and there's a valley down there at the bottom. To the left was another small hill or a small mountain and whatnot. These are pretty plain. They have very little vegetation on them because it's not a lot of rain in that part of the country. So as you're sitting there, and at night you're always working with a partner, and my partners would explain that long before I went over there, that one night over the hill to the left, there was a light that came over the hill and slowly down the hill. Something like what you might explain regarding the river deal that I mentioned. It was close to the ground, moving slowly with the light shining on the ground. And it scared the heck out of them. And they decided, well, we're out of here too. So they immediately left the area, not understanding what they were looking at and so forth. Another incident that I had been privy to, I guess you might say. And then I left the Border Patrol. I went to Customs. Money was quite a bit better, so I decided to work in El Paso, Texas. I had the privilege of working with a couple of gentlemen that they had stories that they told me their stories, and this was like one-on-one, and I don't know what brought up the subject, maybe me, maybe not. One of them explained that he was a soldier at Fort Bliss, that they were working on the prototypes of laser beams, and at that time, I guess this has been in the 70s, the military was looking at trying to use laser beams in a military fashion. So out at Fort Bliss, they took a large laser. They had set it up. One of the main problems with lasers was the amount of electrical power that was needed to have them work in a capacity that was strong enough for military purposes. So they were practicing, or not practicing, but testing a laser beam on Fort Bliss in the middle of nowhere. And they noted a flying saucer was watching them. And the sergeant on duty said, well, aim it at that saucer. And they did so. He said, fire. They fired it, and down it came. He said that the military police immediately coordinated it off. And I thought about that for a long time, and it dawned on me finally, well, I guess if you're going to be utilizing a weapon like that, you're not going to do it in the middle of the base where all these people can see it, meaning the other soldiers, none of their business. You're out in the middle of nowhere, so you would have the military police to make sure, again, that unauthorized people are not in the area. So he said that they would not allow them to go look at it or anything, that they secured it, and they were told to get back to their business and so forth. But he witnessed it being shot down. Then I worked with another gentleman, and we were at the Columbus Port of Entry, working there, and it was real quiet that afternoon. There weren't a lot of people that were entering the United States as a customs officer that we had to check and all that good stuff. With that in mind, he told me about 3 different incidents that he had when he was in the military, and I don't remember 2 of them, but I remember one quite well, and that was that he was with a group of guys, and a flying saucer came about, went right above him, and then it came down, and he was forced to lie on the ground. He said he was absolutely scared to death, and it was just a few feet above him, that and so forth. It scared the living dickens out of him and so forth, but it did depart and so forth. And I do not remember the other 2 stories that he had to tell me. Why not? Then, after retiring from customs, we had an RV. We didn't know what our sons and our grandkids were going to do and where they were going to be, so we had our RV and we were moving around. We sort of settled down in the Denton, Texas area, suburb of Dallas. And after about 2 years of being retired, I was sick of it. And I decided I wanted to go back to work. But I didn't want a job where you wake up at 2 in the morning and you can't see straight, trying to figure out problems and so forth and so on, being responsible for all that. So anyway, I put in an application for numerous places, and Walmart was the first one to call me back, and I wanted to work in the lawn and garden because I wanted to be outside. I did not want to be inside. And I got that job, and I worked there, and there was a gentleman, his name was John, and he was telling me that his wife, I think it was her uncle, and it was a family discussed happening and so forth in their lives. And that was that he grew up in Roswell, New Mexico. He was a young kid, I'm going to say 7 or 8, and I don't know his exact age or anything, but he remembered there in Roswell where they had the coffins of the individuals that were supposedly in a satellite in a UFO that didn't exist, and so forth. But he remembers seeing the small coffins before they were taken off, meaning moved by the military, and they were children's coffins for whatever was in there. And then while I was working there in Dallas at Flower Mound Walmart, again, lawn and garden. Late one night, we also worked as a cashier. And we're sort of offset from the rest of the store, so we have whatever you sell there in lawn and garden. And you have your entry and exit door there for people to come in and buy things from only there and then be able to easily depart. And next to that exit door was our display of hummingbird feeders and feed itself, the red container and all that good stuff. So late at night, about 9:30, we closed at 10. Very few people, it was in the middle of the week and so forth and so on. And I had this lady come in. She was black. She was wearing a beautiful, flowered, flowing, loose dress. She was sort of odd in proportion, arms a little longer than they should be, a very odd face, very long. She spoke very well. She was very courteous. She asked for something regarding whatever it was on those shelves and whatnot. But what caught my attention, she was wearing a sandal-type shoes, was her feet. I can't imagine how they formed or performed on a person to walk. My mind couldn't even capture an image that I could keep in my mind of what was her feet and whatnot. It's always, I've always wondered if, I would assume it was somebody that had a medical situation and whatnot and born that way or whatever, I don't know. But it was certainly odd. It was very odd. I think a doctor maybe would be able to come up with some explanations and names of some diseases that some people might have. But beyond that, it's something that's always puzzled me, and I think about it now and then. Well, some of the things that I've heard about is up in the northwestern corner of New Mexico, they had a radar site that one of the first ideas of radar and so forth. Well, I guess they'd had radar during World War II, but they were expounding upon new types of radar and whatever, and they had some weird radar up there, and they were losing several light airplanes in New Mexico and Arizona, and they were contributing that these signals from the radar were affecting the airplanes and whatnot, and some of them had gone down. By the same token, there was the incident in Socorro, San Antonio, New Mexico, Socorro, New Mexico, San Antonio, New Mexico, and then even over here at Roswell, where supposedly, and you talk to the individuals that had, and I haven't, but they have been discussed, and they're very vocal as to what they saw, and they proclaim that they saw flying discs and little gray men and things like that were hurt and why, but it was contributed to that radar system up there. There was another interesting incident that has taken place in our lives, and it goes back to 1979. Our 5-year-old daughter, riding her bike, was struck by a truck and killed. Went through the funeral, and after maybe 2 years of turmoil, of the death of a child and so forth. But through that time, my wife was coming down to visit me, and I was working in Presidio, Texas. We had a second home up in Marfa, Texas, and the purpose was we wanted our sons to go to a better school system in Marfa versus what they had in Presidio, which wasn't even accredited by the state. So it's much better education up there. So she was coming down to visit me. She was in a mood of great grief and whatnot. On her way down there, she stopped just before getting to Shafter, Texas, in a cutoff of the road, which allowed for people to pull over and enjoy a scenic view right before you get to Shafter. And in doing so, she went down from the road a few feet through the rocks, cactus and whatnot. And she was sitting there and noticed in a distance in front of her, and she's taken me there and showed it to me before. There's a cropping of rocks directly north of where she was sitting. And she noticed two figures that to her emerged from the ground, from a cave. They had silver suits on. They were not particularly tall. They were thin. They waved to her, with them acknowledging evidently that she could see them. She waved back. She was astounded by what she was looking at. During that time, some people noticed our car had been parked off the side of the road. They stopped, thinking that there might be a problem, flat tire, broken down motor, or whatever, and noticed her down there and came down and spoke to her and see if she was okay. During all of that time, the two individuals disappeared from her view. In discussing this much later with a gentleman that I worked with in Columbus, New Mexico, who was part Apache or mostly Apache, and he wanted to be shaman, I believe is the word, within the tribe, and had received a lot of their training and the sweat lodges and the different things that they did to alter reality or whatever. He was telling me that when a person goes into great grief, that mentally they can go into a state where they might be seeing things that most of us or none of us can see, and it would appear that this might apply to what my wife had experienced during that half hour or so.